Hello, it's Phillip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Looking at an interesting book today, which probably some people consider to be pretty much of a socialist type of book. Certainly the sort of label I've thrown at me some 35 years ago in politics, because we're looking really at issues in terms of Europe and social inclusion and exclusion. And it's also looking at what is called consumer debt. So the title of the book is Consumer Debt and Social Exclusion in Europe. An important subject, a difficult subject to some, but one that I think we have to face and face very squarely. The book's been edited by Hans W. Micklitz and Irina Domurath. I hope I pronounced the names correctly. It's from Ashgate Publishing. It's part of their Markets and the Law series, and it's available as a book and as an ebook. My wife Elizabeth and I talked about the book, and we've given it for our book review this title, A Most Welcome Commentary on European Over-Indebtedness in the Early Part of the 21st Century, because that's what it's dealing with. And I'm not going to go back to things like the social chapter and all the other problems we had in the past. Here's the book itself, because we're looking today, 2015, it's a hardback spine, and then there's the back of the book. It's the Markets and Law series from Ashgate. I found it very interesting being part of the history of all of this over the years. There's the index, 240 odd pages in total. You've got the individual chapters. There's a conclusions chapter at the end. You can see there's a lot of footnoting. There are of course subheads. Then you've got, as again you can see, the footnoting appears throughout the text itself. At the front of the book you've got a statement on Markets and the Law series which Ashgate have produced. Then you've got the front page of the book itself, and then you've got the various parts of the book and the various chapter headings, because it's a contributions book. There are 13 chapters in total, and all the people involved are contributors. Then the figures and tables are listed. Then you've got the names of the contributors. I can't go through all the names, unfortunately, because there are a large number of people involved in this. But they are offering a very important point. And this came out of a conference. I'll mention that in a few minutes. That's the acknowledgements. Then the book itself. There's the introduction, which is well worth reading. And after that, we get into the main chapters. I found it an interesting book because obviously this subject matter has been around for a long time, but there hasn't actually been a lot written about it, which is quite interesting. So what we say about the book is as follows, that Hans W. Micklitz and Irina Domurath have brought together 14 colleagues to produce a formidable collection of essays on the financial problems which have bedeviled Europe in the first decades of the 21st century. And they are, in essence, social problems as well as political problems, and it's very much part of the development. This comes hand in hand to a certain extent with this expansion and development of what was the old common market, the EEC, EC, and now the European Union. And I think we have to look at it in that historic context to a certain extent on the political side. The legal side is slightly different. The resulting book that we've got is entitled Consumer Debt and Social Exclusion in Europe, because it's a big issue and it's going to get bigger with the massive migrant problems that we're facing at the moment in 2015. I'm recording this in the summer of 2015, this review, but we welcome this book at this time, and the need for it is, and its analysis of what the editors describe as the dichotomy between the goal of social inclusion and the effects of social exclusion through over-indebtedness since 2008 in Europe is, of course, as I've indicated, of great significance to all of us. The issue of social inclusion and exclusion then remains, of course, a central feature of some of the biggest issues that are facing Europeans in this century and in this decade in particular, so the work is most timely. The contributors have plugged a vital gap in the current literature which is available on the effects of the financial and economic crisis we are now having to confront. And Ashgate have produced an excellent series on this called Markets and the Law, looking really at the legal implications of a lot of this. So they are legal books, but they do offer, I think, a very refreshing objective set of views about where we're actually going to be going. And this is, of course, this book is the latest edition, which puts into context the academic discussion mixed with the real life dimension of over-indebtedness. Very big problem. It's not going to go away, and it's going to get worse, just to cheer you all up. But frankly, that's the position we're in. So we need to have books like this which try to identify what the problems are, and then perhaps we might start being able to work out what to do about it. What we have here then are reports from 6 European countries which have provided socio-economic and legal information on over-indebtedness, as well as the regulatory and judicial responses to the problems entailed by over-indebtedness. And the idea for the book came initially from a conference in 2013 entitled, this is the long title again, The Over-Indebtedness of European Consumers After the Financial Crisis. And that conference was held at the European University Institute in Florence. What has emerged forms the empirical background for 5 analyses of different aspects of inclusion, exclusion as a dichotomy, which will interest, I think, both lawyers and economists alike. And the fact of the matter is, in its simplest terms, you can't spend what you haven't got. And if you do, you're going to become over-indebted. And that is really where we are at the moment. Whether one is a socialist or a conservative or whatever your politics are, those are the realities which we are facing within the European Union itself. So what does become evident upon reading the book is that in the context of credit expansion, the contributors have identified, quote, that individual over-indebtedness has turned into a social issue, which the current design of the consumer credit and mortgage system in Europe has helped to produce, while disregarding the consequential danger of social exclusion. And it's on that basis that the value of this work to the academic, to the interest groups and to the policymakers will, we think, be most keenly welcomed. And when I talk about the problems of things like consumer credit, mortgages and the difficulties, we will at some stage have to start having another think about how we do some of our business. And I think that day is coming much quicker than we would probably imagine, especially on things like the concepts of repossessions and so forth. We're going to have to look at that again if we do have another massive financial crisis, which is quite clearly on the cards. The reader could turn the issues, of course, developed here into a discussion on the financial crisis as a whole, which I'm not trying to do here at all, as it obviously currently affects all European countries. And therefore we're looking at the micro level rather than all the adverse developments which have appeared on the micro level. Now, I hate to use these academic terms and these economic terms, but there is the macro and the micro elements of it. And when I'm referring to something like possession actions, I'm really looking at the micro aspects rather than the macro. The editors rightly describe this approach as being looked at as single responsive measures instead of comprehensive plans. And that's really where we are at the moment. But I would think we will be having to look at a later stage, probably some considerable stage in the future, at comprehensive plans for the future. But that is on the basis that you can get agreement of member states within the EU. And you can, unfortunately, dream on that one at the moment. However, we do have this book, and I think it raises some very important social points, which I believe are very important for all governments. As further food for thought, the contributors suggest that by turning indebtedness into over-indebtedness, the financial crisis has had large-scale social effects in terms of social exclusion that follows default on mortgage instalments, eviction and homelessness. Too right. And the thing is, when do you call a halt to these proceedings? Because you can't go on and on and on, because if you do, you will eventually lead to some form of anarchy. and that's a political science concept, if you like, but you can see the issue. So therefore they're raising, I think, and trying to set, as they've indicated actually at the beginning, some form of agenda about where we're going to go, and that's, I think, a very helpful suggestion. It's too true, therefore, what I've said, because it's why we welcome this new title in the series, devoted to the way in which the law interacts with the market through regulation, self-regulation, and the impact on private law regimes. And that's really where we are in 2015. But as I say, I think there's a long way to go with this, because we always want to strive for balance, and we want to strive for all of the rights that we've fought to keep. So you can understand that there has to be the bit of give and take. But I do feel, as I've indicated earlier, at some stage a comprehensive plan will need to be in force. The publication of the book is cited at 2015, although, as I've said, I think we've got a long way to go, and our responses to the continuing economic crisis have been, frankly, somewhat feeble. But there again, we don't want to have a complete explosion or implosion within Europe. There's the book itself. I thought it was fascinating. There's the back of the book. I thought it was fascinating on a political as well as a legal basis. There's a country report on Iceland there. You see, each country, there's one on Romania, each country has its own problems. But one of the things I've found from my travels around the world has been that it doesn't matter where you are, they use different words, but they're still sometimes the same problems. And the question then is how you're going to deal with them. And that really is something that we've, as human beings, got to grapple with. But I really have found this book fascinating from an intellectual point of view. And I think it's offered a great deal. And I'd love to see it setting, with possibly future books, setting an agenda for the future for all of us. So thank you for awakening my intellectual interests in this area. Bye-bye.